and the goodness of an individual. So this focuses on a person and carrying out that action. So I think and when you get into a situation, as a police officer, it's the best way to act, as a good person through the community, through that person, because with our police reform and everything that's going on, there's so much that can go wrong and just can blow up, and just see how maybe the cops are just so negative. You don't want, as a cop, you don't want that. So I think that's that's a good act of of goodness, which is an act that is carried out by a virtuous person. That's what I'm trying to say. But with that being said, we have the other side that we are going to talk about, which is utilitarianism, which it states the moral theory of which action is right. So we're always going to come up to what action is truly right, and we're not always going to have it. We're not going to always be right about it, but it's useful and it's beneficial to the majority of the community. So, and it also focuses the consequences of an action, which there's always consequences, as you can see, to the police reform, and we see it in the news and everything. So that's it's good to correlate those things. And the final thing that utilitarianism brings is it brings out the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So as we can see through the BLM movement, it was a big deal, and it should be a big deal because it's something that we all saw through the society, and we need to see that situation and bring really good to it. So yeah,
I think we had some questions that we had written beforehand. I think it's a good time to get into those.
Yeah,
because those are really good, on point.
Okay.
Questions. I just can't do them.
So did you guys? So there was a question of race, whether race should be taken into account for the function of greater good, utilitarianism. I would like to point out, though, that in utilitarianism, they don't just talk about the greater good, but that there are, basically pillars in society that are more educated and more thoughtful and have thought these things through, as you were saying. It actually goes back to what you were saying about the police academy in 18 months. There is the potential that police officers could be those pillars of society if they were more knowledgeable or more thoughtful, because they've already gone through they have the training and they have the mental process. But then we go back to the idea of reaction time. Yes, a couple days ago when we got together, we were talking about how it's not just the person. We were talking about it in terms of race. It's not just, let's say a black man who's at his car seeing a police officer coming up to him and seeing how to react, but it's also the police officer who's having to go and encounter a stranger and leaving behind their fingerprints just in case something bad would happen, And so do you guys think that we should include race in this equation?
Can you clarify how it would affect the situation? What are we clarifying? It's a second order question right there.
So, how are we talking about race earlier?
So I think race is something in the police reform. I think it's a big deal.
Oh yeah. I think you were talking about racial profiling. Correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's different people with different personality traits, and they're not always going to be positive. So it's always there's always going to be good and bad depending on the situation. We can see that in the news. African Americans, the police, just intriguing in a different way, and it's just so negative. But there's nothing that really nothing we can really do about that. It's something that it's the police officer takes in mind, and it's a psychological thing that is going through in his head. So we all have those different officers, and there's always going to be good and bad officers depending on the situation. But that's definitely a big deal for sure.
See, but wouldn't you say that the function of a police officer is to protect and serve? Like,
yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I had it in my head and it just left my head. You were talking about racial profiling. I'm sorry. I'm having a brain fart.
We'll come back.
Okay, so I do remember that a couple of days ago I had mentioned the position of the person who is in the car that is afraid of the police officer because of like that potential bias, and you reminded me that they're also people, police officers, and that they still have to go home to like their family, you know. So there's also that fear, if that helps.
Oh yeah, that was all about really better understanding the gravity of the situation, and not just whoever's the suspect or whoever, but also the officer. So they're both two people who have the same amount of rights, and they both have responsibilities. The police officer may be to return to his family that he provides for every day. So just having a better perspective of like their side of the story too is super important.
I keep going back to this thing that you proposed about like them studying more like philosophically, and how it goes back, and if we go back to Aristotle, it like virtue, you know, you can't just assume that the person that you're going towards their car that they're virtuous, but you also can't do the opposite. You can't assume that the police officer is virtuous. But if we did live within a society in which police were to fulfill their function of protecting and serving, and they did have this sort of like a reborn sense of duty without that bias, if we came down to like reforming like their preparation before like in the academy, then I think that would be beneficial to society, and there wouldn't be that question of like them antagonizing one another, you know, like it's not the person in the car fearful, because I think I don't remember her name, but I do remember the circumstances. There was this African American lady who was pulled over because she didn't use her blinkers, and a couple days later, they found her, like, dead in her jail cell. And, like, so people were like, was it justified that, like, she died in her jail cell for, a blinker? And people were like, well, she broke the law. But that is a very rigorous interpretation of the law and, like, of what could potentially happen to her within the prison system for something so trivial. But then, again, you have the police officers who, if they're carrying a gun, then there is, like, the implication that there's fear behind their line of duty. And so I wouldn't say that, like, police officers, like, I would say that there are certain types of incidents that could be prevented that that nowadays we see as, like, warrants for them to, like, pull out their gun and shoot, which
100%.
we look at, like, race nowadays, like, profiling, as you were mentioning. But if they were more knowledgeable, then maybe that could change, you know?
Yeah, one thing I want to bring up was earlier Josh was talking about
Racial
profiling, and a lot of what I see that to be is like harassment, and I talked about this in my paper where police now are doing more of harassment and like citations than protecting and serving, and like that's their sole purpose or that's their sole role in the overall community. And the hope really is to achieve with giving them a background in philosophy to give them better conscious and subconscious decisions, to give them better decision making. And the hope is that philosophy will give them that, because philosophy should give you a better overall aspect of right and wrong, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one thing that Aristotle says, you know, is as a virtuous person, when the behavior is neither excessive nor deficient, and you know, and it regards like through desires, emotions, and appetites. And I think, you know, when you're in a situation like, you know, pulling someone over and they're not cooperating, some emotions come in, as it says in Aristotle, like anger, and like he's not really the suspect is not really like cooperating with you, You know,
and a lot of these are very like unwarranted encounters that police go out of their way to pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something that, you know.
It's just harassment.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, I mean, for example, I saw this man. I mean, he records. It's on YouTube. He records, you know, when they pull him over and everything, and you know, he doesn't. You know, you cannot say anything if the police officer is saying something. You can just close your mouth. And I saw, you know, the female officer. I guess she was just really just tempered about it, and she just decided to pull out her gun and just, you know, and that was just really just excessive on that situation, because, you know, on those it's just something that you just have had the situation calm. You know, you're having this process of, you know, trying to evaluate the solution, and boom, you just kind of just raise the bar up where everyone feels uncomfortable, and any kind of movement can lead to a death. So
I was watching a video where it was just like that. It was one of those dudes who just kind of likes to cause problems with the police, and he's really more so arguing like constitutional rights, but then a female officer approaches, and he does make a very like snarky comment about female police officers being more like confident, or I think he might have said arrogant, and then she snarked back at him. But I mean, overall, those videos are all just people like trying to antagonize each other when you kind of get down to it. But my point is, you know, there's always going to be bad apples in the world, and they're always going to slip by, and then there's always going to be a situation in which they appear, and most of the time it's in bad situations.
So, are they bad apples, or are we seeing bad vices on both sides? Because, I mean, you guys are mentioning, like, civilian, like, misconduct, you know, and, like, that's valid, too. You know, there are assholes out there. I would say, in terms of those people, what would you say their, I guess, vice of character is? Because if for the police officer, it's, like, anger. Like, it's not alarm anymore, because, like, there is alarm in, like, approaching a stranger, but there's anger we've recognized within police officers. But, like, would you say that the civilians who are getting pulled over are mad, or is it something else that they're...
Honestly, I would argue that you can't use those situations as an argument solely because they're not the norm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because they're... No matter what they do, they're probably going to mess it up. I think. Does that make sense?
See,
that you just can't use like the extreme on either side, though.
See, but if the part of police reform that we are discussing right now is like race, then I guess the police officers that we are targeting personally is like the racist ones, you know? So we should also address those who are outside of the norm on that side. Like the people who display vices to the point where like they mess it up for everyone else. So these are the same, like... So, yeah, but I completely agree that, like, we shouldn't generalize. But I think... Let's see. Do you think that they were angry? I haven't seen these videos. Like, were they angry at the police officers for their demeanor?
Most of the time, it's just... Well, the videos that I've seen are just people who... Like, I saw one that was totally unruly. It was in... like, Maryland or somewhere way up there. The dude literally had a sign that said, "Suck my dick," and like to the governor, and it was like on a busy street. And the cops were out there, and he was saying that it's political speech and it's
protected
under the First Amendment, and it is. But I mean, this dude's got vulgar slang on Main Street.
Yeah.
They were just telling him that like people were complaining and that they technically can't arrest him, but like morally, like you're kind of a douchebag for that. So.
It's like insolence, right? They're just
childish. He's trying to start something,
right?
Essentially,
it's like inciting. They're trying to.
Yeah, definitely.
And like in these cases, would you say that like race plays a factor? Like, was the guy white?
It was a white guy. Yeah, but
see, and that's the thing.
There was only white people.